Paul says to the Thessalonians, and in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of others, and so that you will not be dependent on anyone. What's kind of bothered me about that verse, and it's not that I don't believe it, I've always believed it, I just didn't really understand it. Because, you know, Paul would go in and he'd cause all kinds of ruckus. I mean, he's talking to the Thessalonians, he says, lead a quiet life, you know, work hard, be a good employee, do your thing, all those things. And Paul went into Thessalonica and he caused such a trouble that they tried to kill him. I mean, he got kicked out of Thessalonica. And yet, he's saying here, lead a quiet life and earn the respect. And then I think about John the Baptist. You know, he called people snakes and all kinds of things. And I'm thinking, well, that's what we need to win the world for Jesus Christ. We got 93% lost. We gotta preach the gospel. We gotta be big and bold and loud. And we need Billy Graham in here. And we need... Now, God always has a few of those people around, you know, to kind of stir things up. And really, I think Paul's job was go in, stir things up, find some Christians or make some Christians, start a church, and let that church incubate in that community. And those people begin to, you know, filter into that community and reach that community for Jesus Christ. And you know, I've never been the guy like John the Baptist. I've always been the guy in the neighborhood that's kind of quiet. And you know, I'm not a guy that's going to walk up to somebody and just witness to them and try to figure out how to, you know, I'm not that kind of person. I do witness, I do share my faith, but I have to do it through relationship. And so this verse makes sense to me. But I couldn't put it together with this other paradigm. And I realize that most of us are this verse. Most of us are this verse. How are we going to win Western Colorado? How are we going to win Rifle to Christ? Jesus said it here. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now let me just talk about loving your neighbor 101. If you're going to love me, I want you to, first of all, know my name. You know my name, okay? If you're going to love me, know my name. The second thing is, know some things about me. Do you know I have 3 grandkids and I'd love to show you pictures? Do you know that I'm working on my yard and I kind of enjoy doing that? And, you know, I mean, there's just things about me that I want you to know. And you know, if you love me, you'll know some things about me. And then number 3, you'll know my hopes and hurts. You'll know my hopes and hurts. You'll know some things that have hurt me in my life. Things that hurt me now. But you also know some of my hopes. Know my hopes. So, I'm going to let you do a little project, okay, today. I'm going to ask Dave here if you guys would hand these out and do that for me. I'd appreciate it. And would you have a pencil or pen? Grab a pencil or pen. I know Albert doesn't let you do this. I stole this from a guy named Brian Mavis, and I don't even know who he is, to be honest with you. But I heard him speak and on a tape, and because this is where I'm at, I just want you to kind of do this. Now, this is important. I know that there's some of you guys that say, I'm not going to write down anything. I'm not going to do anything. Let me encourage you that the process is really important. Even if you can't write down very much, The process is important. In the middle of that, on the white side of the sheet, the back side is kind of just some advertising. We're doing a how to love your neighbor and start a neighborhood Bible study. We're doing a thing on that, and so I just wanted you to have that information. But on the front side, there's almost a tic-tac-toe looking thing, a grid there. And in the middle of that grid, I want you to put your name in there, you and your wife, or you and your husband, or whatever, and your family. You can write them in. You can put that in, but put that in the middle. I'm going to wait till everybody gets it. So now, if you get bored, just draw little flowers, little stick men. That's okay. That's fine. Now this is what I want to do. The Bible says, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. The closest 8 neighbors, write their name down. If you do not have any neighbors within like a mile or so, write down the people at work.
What square?
What 8 neighbors?
What square on this?
Oh, there's 8 squares.
8 squares, 8 neighbors. Every one neighbor in each square. And I'm going to ask you to put more in that.
Visual learner.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't make. Okay, so you're in the middle. You're 8 neighbors around you. Now, wherever that is, you can kind of figure it out. Now, let me just say this. Don't write down the neighbor that's 3 blocks away that you just happen to go to church with. That doesn't count. Geographically, the closest 8 neighbors you have, okay? Do that. Now, write them down. And let me just say this. Preachers do the worst at this than anybody else in the world because they think, well, we can go to church and we can do our ministry there, and people come to us. We don't have time to love our neighbors. Actually, you guys do a better job. But what we're going to... Brian Mavis, do you know what he calls this sheet? The sheet of shame. Because most people can't do it. You guys, some of you aren't writing. Your closest 8 neighbors. How you doing? Very good. You're done. Yeah. You know what? You're pretty normal. Pretty normal. Okay. All right. Now I want you to write down something about your neighbors that you had a conversation with them and they told you. Something about them. My neighbor is like does concrete. He's a contractor. I know that because his truck is out in front of his house and it says, concrete landscaping or something, I don't know. But that doesn't count. What do you know about each one of those 8 neighbors? What do you know? Write it down. You may know where they went to school. You may know maybe some of their kids' names. You may know where they work. You may know their grandkids, how many grandkids they have. You may know that they like to fish. Who knows? Just something about them. How you guys doing? Some people are still writing. We're going to give them a little bit of time. Now, some of you have lived in the neighborhood a long time, and you know your neighbors. There's people that are really good at this. I find the average person isn't very good at this. And I know what you're thinking. I'm an introvert, Brad. But Jesus didn't say, introvert, you don't have to love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, well, the last thing you're going to put in those squares is your hurts and your hopes. Their hurts and their hopes. Maybe you know that one of them has cancer. Maybe you know that another one has a job problems. They don't have a job. Kid problems. Maybe you know that your neighbor wants to go back to school, or that your other neighbor wants to retire in Arkansas. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. Retirement would be a lot longer in Arkansas, I will say that. Maybe you know their passion. Man, I love the snowmobile. I love to ski. I love to fish. Whatever it is, their hopes and their hurts, their passions. What would happen if this group here and the group we had before, who is spread out all around the rifle area, would get to know their 8 neighbors and really make it their ministry, their mission to love their neighbors? Now, I like simple. When Jesus said, "Go ye therefore in all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father," and then he talks about in the other place where he says, "Go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria," and and I'm thinking, okay, Jerusalem's like Newcastle, that's where I live, and Judea is kind of like western Colorado, and Samaria, maybe Colorado, and the other parts of the earth is the United States and the world, and you kind of think about that's overwhelming to me. How do I, as an individual, reach that many? Well, he said, we will, the church will. And if we would reach our neighbors, if we would reach our neighbors, then we would be reaching the world together. Maybe not just this church, but others. Now, you have an assignment. If you have your quiet time every day, I want you to put this in your Bible, and I want you to fill it out as you start to love your neighbors. You see, when I think about church planting, I've realized that if we're going to reach people for Jesus Christ, it's not going to be when a young man comes to a town and starts a new church, and he tries to get a group together and he tries to start a church. That's not how we're going to reach Western Colorado. How we're going to reach Western Colorado is if each one of us reaches people for Jesus Christ. If each one of us sees ourselves as missionaries. If each one of us, we love our neighbors. Now this is what I call the unproject, because the project usually has a beginning and an end. There's no end to this. Now see, some of you are, you're like, you put an A+ at the top of your sheet because you know your neighbors and you know their hearts and hopes and you've done that. But realistically, what else can you do to love your neighbor? What's the next step? Maybe you've never shared Christ with them. Maybe you haven't done something that you know you should do. So this is the unproject. It's not, well, it's over, that kind of thing. And I want to say this also, that you don't love your neighbors so that they can become Christians. You love your neighbors because Jesus tells you to. And let me tell you the difference between that. You may have this grumpy neighbor who doesn't talk to anybody, and he will never come to Christ. But you still have a responsibility to love that neighbor. A friend of mine, he said that he lives in Denver, and he said every snowstorm, he shovels the lady's house right next to him, her driveway. And he said he shoveled her driveway for 2 years before she talked to him. And then she said, I'm really embarrassed when she finally talked to him and said, I've been watching you and I really appreciate you shoveling my driveway. Why did you do that? Of course, he had an opportunity. Interesting enough, though, the other neighbor on the other side of him started shoveling half of the driveway before he would get there, and he would shovel the other half. See, it was making an impact. He was loving his neighbor. It was making an impact farther than his neighbor. How do you do this? I got some rhyming words because, I'm a preacher. And okay, the first thing is at the bottom there, obey. Just obey the command to love your neighbor. Number 2, and this is, in my opinion, the most important one, is to pray.